The Supreme Court has just finished hearing arguments related to the Defense of Marriage Act. NBC's Justice correspondent Pete Williams was there, and he joins us now. Pete, how are you? What was your takeaway from the arguments?
Right, has heard argument and is through with it. And it's a very different day today. And I think that, again, with the caveat that it's always risky to predict how the court will vote based on oral argument, it did seem that there are at least 5 votes on the Supreme Court to strike down the Defense of Marriage Act. Now, here's why I say that. Again, we look at the pivotal vote, Justice Kennedy, but before we do, the court's liberals were very strongly attacking DOMA, saying that it diminishes the nature of marriage for same-sex couples in the states that have decided independently to permit same-sex marriage. Justice Ginsburg said couples in those states could well ask in a crisis, if they don't get benefits, what kind of marriage is this? She said that these rules are so pervasive in life that without the federal benefits, you end up with what she called a skim milk marriage. So you see that the court's liberals are saying this has a real effect on people. But going to Justice Kennedy, he seemed to have 2 problems with the law. One is the question of whether the federal government has the right here to say what marriage is, whether that's traditionally something that the states have defined and the federal government has just recognized it. And secondly, he seems also to be bothered that even if the government does have the power to do it, it can't do it here because it's unconstitutional discrimination. He said it's not narrowly focused, that it doesn't deal just with questions traditionally associated with marriage, like whether you get survivor benefits or estate taxes, but because it's so broad, it applies to 1,100 separate programs. And he says also it applies not just in the states that, in essence, that DOMA was passed to protect, states that don't want to follow the court rulings that say you have to abide by same-sex marriage, but it also applies in the states that have decided to permit same-sex marriage. Couples in those states don't get the federal benefits either. So finally, the court did talk about what the federal government said. The Solicitor General, arguing for the Justice Department, quite strongly said this law should be rejected because it was passed based on moral disapproval. And he quoted from the House report with some negative language about same-sex couples. Now, to be sure, there are members of the court that think DOMA should be upheld, but it did seem like there are at least 5 votes to strike it down. One other point here, Joy. That's assuming they get to the question about whether it should be struck down. They have to go through a door to get there, and the door is, did the parties have the right to come here in the first place? And I'll just say one little thing about that. This is an odd case. Normally, you don't get to appeal to the Supreme Court if you won. And the federal government did win in the Court of Appeal, so there's a question about that. But assuming they get to the merits of the case, and it seems likely that they will, then I think there are at least 5 votes to strike DOMA down.